Welcome back to the Imaginary Gallery, the gay world of narcissism. And tonight is the sub-series, Blast from the Past, which is a part of that series. What I thought I would do is share a very old story, hence the Blast from the Past. It wasn't necessarily teenage years, but it was shortly after, which I figured I'll tell the story from that viewpoint, geared towards the younger crowd. I was like 20 years old, and I had recently left the nest because I was one of the kids that lived with parents in a suburban neighborhood, and they had like strict rules where I had to like be home at 12:30 in the morning or whatever, curfew. And here I had friends who were out at parties all night, and I was jealous, thinking, they get to stay out all night, why can't I? But regardless, that was the background I had. So imagine the beauty when I actually went to college and decided to live in an apartment on my own for the first time. It was great. So that's what I did. I went around the area near the school, which happened to be what they call Midtown in this area. Much different from suburbia. Midtown was more my style, more alternative, more interesting, and so on. So for me, it was a thrill to be able to live down there on my own with no curfew. Oh, so I did. At that time, the rent, I believe, was $200 a month. So for me, though, this represented like a brand new taste of freedom, because there was no mommy or daddy there to say, turn those lights off, turn that music off, what are you doing up still, where have you been? None of that was there. So I thought, oh, this is peaceful heaven, I can finally be free. So for me, it was a great experience of freedom, especially from all those years of strict rules. Well, throughout this period and throughout the time even when I lived at the parents' house, as far as dating goes, I was kind of a shy kid. So and of course back in those days, we didn't have Obama pushing gayness on the unsuspecting public. We didn't have that kind of thing, or queer as folk shows on television. So it was kind of like an underground life, which several people were in tune with, but several people also hated. But my dating experiences up to that point pretty much followed the same pattern, which was I didn't chase after anybody. If I saw somebody pretty, I'd put myself in their presence and see if they did anything. If they didn't, whatever. If they did, great. Well, that was the method I used. Not to say it was a good method, but what resulted usually then would be, because first of all, gays or even straights or anybody who's a man, men, maybe women too, but I've never been one of those, except the Narcopath series, and that's not real. So with men, though, I already know, men are aroused by what they see. So they also develop what you could consider types. Based on their own experience, they're all unique. But for example, you may have like an ideal type, maybe modeled after some movie star. And we have these types. However, in real life, you don't usually come across those types in many cases. So what would happen would be there'd be someone of a different type, just again, shallow, superficially looking at physical traits only, and someone like that would be like, hey, I'd like to date you. And I would think if I saw that person in public, I probably would not pursue it, but why not? So I would. And a lot of times I found myself getting into trouble with this because I would figure, well, look at that. There's no way I'd ever fall in love with that, which was shallow, superficial, and inaccurate. But I didn't know. So I would say sure, and I would go ahead and do whatever, and sometimes it would progress, and I'd actually start seeing things that I never noticed before, and whatever, but still, we still have what you could term probably fetishism, where you have like specific types. Like the straight guy who has a thing for Asian chicks with big breasts. That's like a type. And of course that's, as I say, superficial because it's basically treating the lady as an object. Well, when I was a 20-year-old kid or younger, that's pretty much the way it was, oh, that one's cute, I'll date it. And you soon learned that, oh, that one's really cute, but he's a mess. So it makes up for it. Or somebody else who's not so cute, but is really nice and really friendly. It's like a compensation type deal. But I'd gone through many years of having ideal type, fetish type things, but the people I'd meet didn't turn out usually to be like that. So that was just something I thought, well, that's great for fantasy, but not reality. However, let's fast forward back to this moment when I'm in this apartment on my own for the first time ever. So I was going to this nightclub with one of my college buddies, which I used to pick up in my car, and I'd take him, we'd go out and spend the evening at this discotheque that was cool because it played Book of Love, and it played other bands that were like cutting edge at the time in the 80s, or actually maybe the 90s. But anyway, it was just like a perfect place, music-wise. And when you're a kid in college, music, well, in my case, was my world. It was like my magic, my escape hatch. Just Book of Love especially, which is still together and still touring and has a brand new 30th anniversary disc. I'm planning on getting if it comes out on disc, but again, ADHD. So anyway, I was going out with or hanging out with people that I wouldn't normally consider my type per se, but the internal brain critic was saying, just because it doesn't have this or that doesn't mean it's not a nice person. Give it a chance. So I would, and I did on many occasions. So that was all fine and dandy. However, one particular evening, my friend and I went out to this place, and I happened to notice one of those people, which is representing one of those who physically, superficially, just by looking, is like, wow, that is my type completely. But this one was in line or something for the nightclub, and I looked at it and thought, oh my goodness, but I didn't say anything because I was a young 21-year-old kid and this person was a little bit older. But I went ahead and went in the nightclub and did my thing. However, I found myself in the bathroom, and oh my goodness, there was that person. Because the experience in the past would be, if there was such a person, like that physically looked exactly like the perfect type, if I ever got to know them, there'd be something wrong with them. And while we were in the restroom, I happened to turn towards its face, and he had said, I like your hair. And at this time, I had this big old crimped hairdo that went everywhere. This was, again, right around the 80s. And he'd said that. That was like an icebreaker, because I was just content with thinking, wow, that looked perfect, but okay, I just didn't pursue because I was shy. Well, anyway, there he was, talking to me, so I thought, well, great, thanks. And so we talked a little, and then I went about my evening. Well, this kind of made me a little excited because I thought, wow, one that has that shallow, superficial beauty, he's talking to me. So I was excited. Well, finally, the evening came to an end, and so I went out to the parking lot with a friend, and everybody always gathered around outside the door when this happened, and there was this person, this knight in shining armor, or so I thought. And he was like, "So, what are you doing?" And I was like, and I started to get that feeling of the daring behavior because I was kind of excited and had extra adrenaline and thought, wow. So I said, "Oh, I've got to go take my friend home, and then I'm going to go home to my own apartment and have a party." I invented that line on the spot. And then he had said, "Oh, really? Well, how many people are going to be at this party?" And I said, "Just one." And he had said, "Would you like company?" And again, all this was like brand new because I'd never had this type of experience. So I was like ecstatic and thinking, "Oh my goodness, wow. Sure, here's my number." And again, I was a kid. But I took my friend home, and this person showed up as planned, which at first I figured, yeah, this is not going to happen. Then I drive home, and there it is. To be continued. So keep in mind, at this point, I was still new. I was still green. This was all unique. So, we spent the evening together and discussed this, discussed that. I asked questions here, he asked questions there. Turns out he happened to live just a few blocks away, which I was thinking, this is getting better by the minute. Because, again, it was the thrill of the tables turning where one of my superficial types was like coming on to me, which was rare at this point. So I thought, this is the sign. I found a great thing. Well, we ended up seeing each other, like maybe a few days later in the week. A movie or a dinner or both. And for me, it was like, again, a new lifestyle because before, in the olden days, living at mommy and daddy's, this would never be possible. So I was just taking it as it came, and I was excited, thinking, wow, this is great. Well, in the meantime, I happened to have another college buddy, lady friend, and I would talk to her on the phone regularly, and I would tell her, oh my goodness, I met this person. Oh, he's so wonderful. Oh, his name is blah, 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 blah. Oh, and I would just like tell and tell and tell about all the stuff that happened. And guess what happened? She happened to have a friend who was a hairdresser, which I never mentioned, but this particular knight in shining armor was also a hairdresser. The friend of mine had said to me, "Oh, one of my friends told me about one of her friends who's a gay. I hope you never turn out like him." And I said, "What do you mean?" And it turned out that he had bragged to the friend of saying, "I've had sex with over 100 men and one woman." And was like bragging like that was something to be proud of. And the friend of mine had said, "I hope you never turn out like that." Well, this was like all in the past. And then here I was bringing up this person I'd met, and she then recalled that story after talking to her friend. And she said, "That guy you've been talking about, that's the one I told you about, that said the thing about the sex with 100 men and one woman." And she told her friend that I was like dealing with him, and her friend told her to tell me, "Oh, he will never change. He is a tramp. He will never change." Well, I heard that, and I was kind of surprised because at this point I was naive, and as you'll soon learn, this is dealing with a cluster B mentality. But of course I didn't want to believe any of that, so it's like, yeah, right. So I told him, it's like, "Hey, my friend says her friend knows you, and she says that you're a tramp and you'll never change." And his response was, "Oh, What does she know? She has nothing. Which didn't mean a lot to me at that moment, but she has nothing? What does what she has have to do with what she said? But again, welcome to dealing with the cluster B. I had no idea. I just thought this was a normal life experience. So, of course I know different now. That's why I brought this up, because I was thinking about it. Like, this follows the classic steps. Because when you're new to it, you don't know any better. So, anyway, I kept that in mind, but at the same time thought, I've met the right person. This is exactly what I've been looking for. I'm lucky. So, we still hung out here and there. A few times a week I'd go to his place, he'd come to my place. He'd cook the dinner one night, I'd cook the dinner the other night. Sometimes it was so nasty, he'd pour it down the toilet stool, because I was, again, new to all this. But, anyway, eventually I started to catch on that maybe what that other girl had found or said was actually true. Because, remember, I'm a college student living in my own apartment. He's a neighbor a few blocks down, and I started to notice that he frequented that nightclub regularly. And I eventually understood and learned that what he did on a regular basis was he would go to this nightclub, flirt with some stranger, shower them with drinks, and then go to their home and make lust with them. Which for me was shocking, because here I was thinking, well, this person I've been seeing now lately, a few times a week, this is fun. To find that he's at that nightclub other nights, like when I have to study and go to bed and wake up for school, and it just seemed kind of strange. Like, again, I was young and new, thinking, well, you and I have been hanging out a lot. Why are you going there all the time? What's this about? And there'd never really be a straight answer. And then eventually what would happen would be, I'd find out that it was true. He would regularly go to this nightclub, pick up tricks, play with them, and then go home. And I just was thinking, well, what's going on? Because you and I are doing these things, so I would find out. Because I was nosy, and I would, like, do my homework and studies, and was trying to figure out what exactly am I dealing with, because I thought it was perfect, but then this seems like it isn't. So I would, like, drive to the nightclub, spy, and see his car there, and think, he's here again. What is he doing? And then maybe I'd check back later, and his car never went home because he lived down the street. So the next day I'd be like, what did you do last night? Why were you at that nightclub? Did you do something you shouldn't have? What's going on? And he had eventually confessed and said, oh, I went home with so-and-so and we did such and such. Oh, but it meant nothing. It just happened. And I'd be like, what? Which today I laugh at, thinking, oh, so you were just walking down around the bar and then you slipped and you fell and you were in bed together. Oh, it just happened. But I didn't have the words or the knowledge at that point. I was just thinking, okay. Well, my thing was, I thought, well, I found finally something great. Let's make it work. I'll make it work. And then I kept seeing this kind of thing, which told me there's a different game plan being played by the other person. So this continued for a while, and still I had that fetish desire and thought, I wish I could just isolate this for my own use, but clearly that's not happening. So finally I figured, well, this person's older and doing all this, so I finally went to him and I said, you know what? Clearly you enjoy going on other dates with other people that just happen to happen. So, you know what? I'm going to do the same thing. Well, of course, his response was, well, that's not what I want. And again, not knowing anything about the cluster B, I was like, okay, well, too bad, because you're doing what you want. But then I want more. And I was sarcastic then, too, so it's like, yeah, you want more what? More guys? I know. But again, this was all new to me, so he was saying this I want more. I thought, I bet you do. So, anyway, we kept still hanging out here and there, but I started to think about things differently because, again, we didn't have any June Cleaver role model to follow. It's like two guys are attracted to each other. Where does that go? What do you do? There's no guidebook. So I figured, well, that's what he's doing, so I'll do my thing. And so I came across some other guy, which, once again, did not represent like the ideal perfect type that I would like to say, that's the one. It was not, but it was nice and gave me its phone number and said something like, you're not going to call me. And I said, well, yes, I will. Come on, you won't. And I did, of course. It happened to be a pilot who had a pilot's license, and it was the most beautiful date you could ever have. He went to the airport that was nearby and rented an actual, some kind of airplane, and that was our evening. He took me in the airplane, let me steer the plane. Of course, I almost toppled it over, and I learned what negative G is, and it was just kind of fun, but at the same time, my brain was still thinking about the ideal type, and I was thinking, well, the ideal type clearly is not working the way it should, as they often do not work as they should, but I was new to this, so I thought, well, I'm having fun with somebody new. Well, then the weekend came, and it was like the same nightclub every Saturday. So that particular night, the pilot and I decided to go there. Well, I knew that that other person would be there, and I thought, I don't care. I'm sick of this. I've made it clear that I like this person, and he's doing all this other nonsense. Well, I'm going to do my own thing in my own life. So I ended up showing up there with the pilot, and we just were there together and did the usual, listen to music, jiggle our hips to the music, buy a drink, talk. Well, I did notice out of the corner of my eye this other monster creature was there, and I thought, well, it serves him right. I mean, I've said what I felt, and he's made it clear that he's not on the same page. Well, this whole thing went on, and it was fun, and so on. And then it came to an end. And all of a sudden, I think it was maybe the next day, I got a phone call from the monster. The I like your hair monster. And he had sent or called and said, hey, how would you like to come over tonight to my house for a dinner and this movie? And keep in mind, I was out with the pilot for fun, but I guess you could say my heart was still like thinking, I want that thing to work because it seemed like such an accomplishment. And of course, we're deluded when we think such things, I've learned later. We try to excuse away certain things that aren't right, that we would normally never excuse because they have a pretty nose, or a pretty lip, or whatever shallow, superficial criteria we use. But anyway, all of a sudden, he was like calling, inviting me over to this dinner, and I was excited, like, well, sure. And so I did it. So I'd go there to the house, we'd do whatever, watch the movie, I'd have the food, and then I'd spend the night there. And when I'd wake up, I'd be told, hey, tonight, how would you like to do this? And I was like, wow, maybe he's seen the light. And was like, yes, okay. And then more. It's like it just kept happening, which was so different from what I was used to. It even got to the point where I told the pilot person, it's like, you know what, I think I'm getting more serious now with the other person, so I had fun with you, but I don't want to hurt you or lead you on because I have empathy. Maybe I shouldn't. But he, of course, faded away. And this thing went on day after day after day. And I thought, again, superficially, I had won. Well, I later learned from other sources that when this was happening, the monster person had actually told the friends, when I saw TJ there that night with that boy, smiling and having fun, oh, I just decided I've got to have him in my presence every night of the week. So it wasn't that he was falling for me, it was I was a possession being taken elsewhere, and he wanted to pull the possession back into his control. Which, again, this is all because I know now. But then I was thinking, wow, he really likes me now. Oh, what's this mean? Continued to see the person. Turns out that he displayed some other sloppy things, like when it was my birthday, for example, I went over to his house and he presented me with this gift, and the gift was two fake diamond stud earrings. And when I opened them, I was like, and he had a roommate who laughed at him because my ears were not pierced. I've seen in other videos the narcissist isn't any good at buying gifts. Well, this was like a perfect example. And of course, stupid me was like, oh, that's okay. I'll get my ears pierced. It'll be a special thing. Because I was retarded and young. And I thought that this person likes to mess around with all these strangers, but all I have to do is say the right thing, and he'll learn that I can be just as good. And I had that naive thought. Which brings us to the next part of the story, where I would try to fix this, saying, you don't need to be with those strangers if they mean nothing, because I do mean something. And I would continue to try to use this rationale, thinking it's going to save the day, which, whatever it did, because I would find out on more occasions the same thing. Oh, I went to the bar and it just happened. It meant nothing. It kept happening, and I was like, you know what? This is a scam. So this brings us to one of the lessons that I learned through this experience, which later, of course, made more sense in the future. But what ended up happening was I finally got to a point where I realized that this is just not right. Sure, it was hard to let go of the fact that I'm the straight man who found the perfect Asian with the big teeth, but she turns out to be a whore. Well, that's kind of the realization I was coming to. And so eventually I started to see the person a little bit differently. Like, you go through all the stages of the excitement and thinking it's going to work this way, but then it works that way. Well, finally, I kind of grew apart from this person. So what started to happen was I began to develop some kind of a complex, because my thoughts were, hey, I'm spending my time with you as much as possible, and yet you're still chasing after strangers. And I started to think that, well, maybe I'm lacking something. Maybe I'm missing something, because if he was really happy with me, then he wouldn't even think about running off to that nightclub the one night I've got to get up early and doing whatever he does. So I started that complex feeling like I must not be enough. Well, fast forward several months later, after I lost touch, or pretty much did not attempt any additional interactions, I find out that he has found a boyfriend. He has a lover now, and they live together in his house. And of course, at first I was resentful, thinking, I bet it's going to work with that lover, and it didn't with me. What's that lover have that I don't have? Oh, and I was furious, because I figured that should have been mine. Well, weeks later, all of a sudden I get a phone call from the monster saying, hey, my boyfriend's gone for the day. Would you like to come over? And of course, this was like the very beginning of my realization that I was stupid and retarded for thinking that I wasn't enough, because I'm out of the picture now, and he's got a partner now. And what's he doing? He is reaching out to me for illicit behaviors. So that made like a snap go off in my head, like saying, this is the way he is. It doesn't matter who he's seeing at the time. This is who he is and what he does. So for me, it was like a big breath of fresh air, because I didn't want to think that whatever I was doing wasn't enough. He had to find it elsewhere. And again, later we learned it's the narcissistic personality disorder. They want as much supply as they can get. And they will get it, and they will sneak, and they will lie, and they will cheat around the systems. And when you catch them, they'll blame you. Well, you wouldn't marry me, or whatever they say. It's like, who would marry you? But that's something to think about, just in case you find yourself dealing with such people. And learn, don't listen to the phony excuses they give, because they don't match up with reality. Peace.